not deserved, and thank you for Tony for having me out. I don't know about you. Do you mind if I sit and we just make this like a free legal advice for a half an hour thing? So I guess I didn't come to cannabis law for cannabis. I came to cannabis law because the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act was not being applied properly by our judiciary. I come out of basically DC think tank land. That terrible marijuana policy project, I wasn't involved with them, but I was involved with the Federalist Society, largely that believes that laws should be executed as written. And we have an act that says that we have immunity, says we have defenses, and our judiciary just simply ignores them. So that's why I actually became a cannabis attorney, and that was about 7 years ago, and now we have just a host of issues that have come along with it. Right now I'm litigating 2 cases in the appellate courts, one expanding the scope of what your defenses could be if your card expires at the time of if you're pulled over and you have THC actually in your blood. So we know about People versus Kuhn, for instance, the idea that you could have as a medical patient some THC in your blood and you're driving, and you shouldn't be actually subject to criminal prosecution and sanction for just having THC merely present in your blood. Second issue is I have a case before the Court of Appeals. It was granted by the Supreme Court on leave, and they just remanded back to the Court of Appeals to make a determination that someone shouldn't be going to prison for marijuana, period, after Lockridge. In 2015, your Supreme Court basically eliminated sentencing guidelines, the idea that your legislature controls the decisions of judges as to how they should sentence someone. It expands the authority that a judge is given to sentence someone for whatever crime they commit. It, at first, makes maximums more scary. So, for instance, if you might hear that no one goes to jail for marijuana, for instance. Delivery is a 4-year felony. If you have the wrong judge under Lockridge, the judge, even though it's your first offense, could find justification for sending you to prison for 4 years. So my case argues that it's 2017. Cannabis is what we all know cannabis to be. I'm not going to tell you what it is, and no one should be going to prison for it. So that case is making its way up the chain. The Supreme Court, again, granted leave on it, meaning the Supreme Court agrees with it, but there's some lesser issues that have to be sorted out by the Court of Appeals. So that's what I do. I'm a lawyer first. Cannabis has just been an opportunity to litigate for principles of limited government and individual autonomy. And that's what I do. My business has now gone more towards the licensing, which is awkward for me because I see all the nasty stuff that's going on. You should look at Ohio and Pennsylvania. If you are concerned about what's going to happen here, in my opinion, everyone's talking about how there's not going to be any caps on licensing. Think about it. There's natural things that occur in the marketplace. There's going to be a lot of losers in this licensing scheme. And the way that the legislation is designed is to eliminate the small player, and caregivers won't be able to transfer to provisioning centers under this licensing regime. So we're all fearful for what the future brings. Any attorney who's telling you what the future will bring probably is just guessing as well as anyone else. I really don't have much to say, so if you guys want to just ask questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I don't really care. Anyone? Okay. Any thoughts? Sure.
After the initial licenses come out, do you think there'll be a reevaluation period where they, like every other state before us, has kind of come out with licenses, and then they kind of saw how things were going, and then they ended up giving out a ton more licenses after that?
So the first thing is, I think it's important to think of the licensing scheme as basically the state taking control over the gray caregiver market. I don't think it's about proliferation of cannabis at all. I think it's about just the state saying, we're tired of this system where we can't actually track anything whatsoever. We're going to take it, we're going to make everyone follow our rules, and we're going to basically expel anyone who isn't following our rules. So if you appreciate it from that perspective, there are yearly renewals under the Facility Licensing Act. A lot of the decision-making, according to the law, is supposed to be the community actually telling the state how things are going. So there's a provision under the Facilities Licensing Act that basically requires the community to provide a yearly, this is how things are going. Any sort of citizen comment that's sent to either the local community or the state is supposed to be reviewed. So I'm fearful that considering, let's assume that we don't go rec in 2018. I assume that the licenses that are issued, I think that there will be perhaps the highest failure rate of any licenses around the country. Consider Ohio, Pennsylvania are only allowing 12 licenses. And Colorado, for instance, 40% of licenses are out of business within 1 year. We have an active activist community in Michigan. We have a lot of people who have been economically depressed in Michigan for some time that are interested in this. A lot of the phone calls I receive are about, I need investment. A lot of people are going to be vying for these licenses, and there's going to be more people producing than people that actually need this medicine, require it, are going to be patients from the provisioning centers. And I suggest that the amount of cannabis being produced in Colorado, often people say that's just, we have too much of it. No one pays for cannabis anymore because the market's not there for it. So I anticipate 2,000, 2,500 licenses, and the state's taking a position that they're not going to have any hard caps, means that people are going to go out of business or the renewals are going to be denied, and your remedy is going to be left in the circuit court. You will have to sue. You do have rights under the Administrative Procedures Act to be treated properly, fairly, and constitutionally by this licensing board, that 5-panel board that everyone's frightened of. And you should enforce your rights in circuit court. That's it. Inevitably, big think, long time, this just trend towards inevitable freedom for cannabis use. That's clearly going to happen. I think it's a cultural shift towards cannabis. It's just, I used to be at the position that Keith Stroop has, that I don't care who makes money on cannabis as long as people aren't going to jail for it. But it's just the amount of control that people are exercising through government in this sphere is the most I've ever seen. So, sorry, that was a bit of a ramble, but I just wanted to give you the whole picture from my perspective.
I'm just wondering, I know you can't speculate or give any kind of information or facts on this, but do you have any idea of how long you think the caregiver model might last?
Well, I think that the black market will always exist here. Again, the state of Colorado suggests that, 25% of all sales they think are still illegal. They think they could collect, 10 million to 25 million more in tax revenue if people are actually not still buying from their, non-licensed entity. In Michigan, I think because we are culturally different, we have a lot of anti-authoritarian types, especially as we move up the state, that it will continue, and caregivers will continue, but criminal prosecutions will continue. My big thing about the Facilities Licensing Act, with all of the product requirements, packaging, it's going to be really easy to identify caregiver medicine from state-sanctioned medicine. So when the police pull you over and you don't have your medicine properly packaged, this is not MMFLA compliant. You must be one of those caregiver people. It's just the scrutiny of non-MMFLA licensed packaged material, I think, is going to lead to more criminal prosecutions. I would rely on the fact that the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act resulted in higher arrests for people who use cannabis. That's it. People are going to be more confident, just like they were before, and the state's going to continue to prosecute. That's my opinion. So, right. So I don't want to get too deep into that. I will talk to you after, because there's people's names that you'd have to understand to appreciate where that is. For those who don't know, a representative in White Lake is attempting to modify legislatively what our administrative agency, LARA, is doing as far as licensing people. So stacking is the idea that we're going to have licenses at the same facility, and there's going to be rules associated with doing that. That will allow for a larger producer, a larger processor, ones that are able to use basically competitive advantage of having simply these licenses and lots of them to basically put the small player out of business. So this representative, Republican from White Lake, is trying to eliminate this in a sense. Only have, I think it's 2 in an address. The industry is, of course, clawing for any alternative, looking to malls, strip malls, to get around this. But I just don't think that this is going to pass, because I think that, Michigan legislature and the industry are kind of in cahoots on where this is going. I don't know what the intentions of the representative were, but I don't know if he woke up and he was like, oh, there's going to be too much marijuana, or he was just trying to satisfy, a constituent. It is election season in some local municipalities. I haven't looked into it that much to see if White Lake has an election this year, but I would just think that he's perhaps just pandering to some interests. But again, I have to talk to it after if you want to know more. Good stuff. No one wants any free legal advice. No guns and drugs, please. So if it's a gun question, guns and drugs don't mix. That's not for you.
After all the regulations are set in place. After all the regulations are set in place. How are they going? What kind of charge could they have against a non-licensed grower if I grow tomatoes in my personal garden and put them out next to the road and put $1, please contribute? I pay a fine for not paying taxes on the money I collect. If I do the same thing with my plants and put them in a baggie out on the front of the road, am I going to go to jail or pay a fine? Then how do they separate the agricultural?
So we do have the Controlled Substances Act, 1971. We have all the state laws regarding it. And we have to remember that the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act in 2008 did not make marijuana lawful, did not make it legal. It still is illegal. It's 100% illegal. 100% illegal. There's nothing I can do about that. All that the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act did is provide you an immunity from arrest and prosecution as long as you are able to show them that you are possessing 2.5 ounces for your medical use, and you have a card, right? That's all it did. There's no sort of rejiggering of what this is. You'd still be, if you left a bag out for people to pick up, you would be charged with felony distribution, and you could land yourself in jail or prison. That's just it. And the Facilities Licensing Act doesn't change that at all. The Facilities Licensing Act just simply allows a different commercial supply chain for cannabis, and in my opinion, will compete with the caregiver market until the caregivers simply are out of business. Because the Medical Marijuana Act didn't really think through how actual cannabis grows. 2.5 ounces, 5 patients, 72 plants. So I don't want to name names, but the same people who drafted that legislation are the same people who are involved with now. So no, go ahead. No one else has questions. So
Talk I got all day. If you take the federal government out, if you take the feds out, set it aside. Okay, Anheuser-Busch, Miller Company, they owned the beer industry. Now average Joe makes some beer, gets his little license, now he's a microbrewery. Okay? Take the feds out, don't care about them right now. Marijuana could go the same route. 10 big corporations in Michigan own the industry, but then micro growers come up with a bigger, better product.
No, I'm completely supportive of MI Legalize's initiative in 2018. I think that's the way it should go. I think from a fairness perspective, freedom perspective, obviously eliminates the criminal sanctions that come along with it. I 100% agree, and the industry could go that way. I'm just telling you that the Facilities Licensing Act with the regulatory assessments doesn't design the system that way. That's it. That's what the 500 plant license is supposed to be about, but when you actually make the fees, aside from the regulatory assessment, the same, it's entirely the same. There's no incentive to be a small person, to have some sort of craft experience, to do something innovative. It's trending towards just simply mass production. I mean, and if you're fearful of actually Bush, you probably know that Constellation Brands just acquired 10% of Canopy Growth. Right, of course. So the industry is heading that way. Can Michigan be competitive, trying to protect local interests by having a more equitable, fewer barriers to entry to get into the marketplace, while still being competitive nationally when the federal government does get it under control? And we're concerned about rescheduling to Schedule 2, which will basically just make it completely pharmaceutical interest. And I don't know what's going to happen with that.
Any idea on transportation requirements and limits? Like, is it one of those things, if I might require a secure transportation for testing, like taking a gram to a test facility, I'm going to have to pay a transportation facility to do that, even though that's less than any ounce requirement?
Well, that sounds like a good question. There's an advisory bulletin that came out that suggests that the testing will actually be able to be done without the secure transporter. But all these advisory bulletins are advisory. How it works legally is that these rules and regulations that have to be promulgated, those rules and regulations are for the licensing board to utilize and follow to make its decisions. So they're issuing advisory bulletins as to how the rules and regulations may be promulgated and eventually what they will have to follow. And so the advisory bulletin suggests that they're not going to have to use a secure transporter. Frankly, a secure transporter is probably one of the most, we have the most questions on. For instance, you look at the capital requirements for a secure transporter, $200,000. I anticipated before I saw that capital requirement that the secure transporter would be the most moneyed license. It would be one of the largest, most restrictive licenses that you can obtain. I was afraid of regionalization, of secure transporters. Only so many in certain regions. Other states have done that. But I don't know what the licensing panel or Laura has decided. There are work groups where some people from the industry, the police, et cetera, are deciding these issues, but these are all novel, these are all new. No one has any idea what they're doing. The secure transporter is, this is something that probably should be handled by the company itself. Why would you even need a third party in the first place to move your product? But I don't make the rules, so.
Do you know when the rules come out? Like next
Shelley Edgerton, Laura's director, has been telling us for months that we should anticipate emergency rules guiding us at least for the step one of the application process, and those are expected next week. But those may be limited to only the initial pre-qualification step. So, frankly, I think we are incredibly behind. I think that this is a mess. I mean, if you ask me, I guess, whatever. I don't think this is going to be a success. I don't think that they have taken it seriously. They've been dragging their feet. Remember that we were supposed to have this licensing panel appointed sometime, March of this year, and then the appointments from Snyder came in September. From the start, we're 4 months behind, or 5 months behind, or whatever it is. And then they're going to basically design the rules and regulations which define the entire scope of the industry, every little thing that you're going to want to know about how this is actually going to work. We just started work groups. People just sat down and started shaking hands and introducing themselves. We're behind, in my opinion, but I guess I'll be happy if they're not. I don't know.
How transparent is the activity of those work groups coming out of that?
I think that there are minutes kept, but I haven't seen any. I haven't seen any. I just, I know people that are on those work groups, and, they tell me whatever they want to tell me, but it doesn't seem like they're actually making a lot of progress.
I walked in at the end of your conversation. I don't know who asked the question, but you made it sound as if that caretakers are going to be eliminated in the next, 3 to 5 years with what's happening in the industry?
So I don't know if there's any political ability, political capital from our legislature to do that. I think everyone would freak out. But if you have eliminated a caregiver's ability to transfer to a provisioning center or dispensary, like they have done in the Facilities Licensing Act, and the consumer shops only at the Facility Licensing Act provisioning center, what's the caregiver to do if he doesn't have whatever is going on? Our caregiver has been limited by a case called People versus Overholt. We used to think maybe that people would be able to transfer to unregistered, unconnected patients as long as there was a Section 8 medical purpose. A lot of attorneys told a lot of people that, and our Supreme Court and Court of Appeals has said, no way. You can only transfer to 5 people. You're registered and connected patients. So if you can do that, I don't understand how you're going to be able to compete against someone who can manufacture essentially an unlimited number of plants if stacking exists and has a provisioning center. I just don't see it happening. So I think you'll be foreclosed out of the marketplace unless there's a change in law, or you just simply are going to, act recklessly with the police, and whether there's political will of the police to continue prosecuting people who are growing marijuana. Inevitably, this will be left up for the recreational vote in 2018. You'll have more protections to grow as a caregiver for your patients if that passes, obviously, because you'll have the 100, 150 plant micro-business, micro-grows. I think it's going to collapse. Yeah. Look at look. Yeah. It's $1 billion market. I mean, it's a $1 billion market. There's competitive advantages, and that will lead to the price collapsing. I've met people in California that's $900, on the producer's end or less for indoor, and even less for outdoor or greenhouse. I mean, any innovation that takes place in any market, we are still an emerging market. When we get to basically more mature, prices is coming down, and that's something that every caregiver is going to have to deal with. And again, consumer preferences are trending towards oils, vaporizers, etc., that have nothing to do with actual, quality flower. That's my opinion. If you look at actually the data that comes from more markets that are further down the legal pathway, the flower market is stagnant. It's still the largest market, but the vaporizers, oils, chocolates, etc., those are up 100% to 500% year over year. So I don't know how you, as a small caregiver, are able to compete in that marketplace. If you believe in the medical aspects of cannabis like I do, then perhaps your person will be coming to you because that's not available on the recreational market, but I don't know how that's going to turn out. I talk about how if cannabis is going to actually take a bite out of the $1.1 trillion pharmaceutical industry, then there's room for all of us. But if it's a supplement or a complement to alcohol or tobacco, our market is smaller. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Sorry. I'm going to take another question, though, too. So,
yes, the pharmaceutical companies don't give anything away, folks. We don't want to compete against Marlboro. We'd much rather hook up with Pfizer as far as that's concerned. Once we go Marlboro route, they'll be able to walk into a Speedway and buy some Colombian Gold. There's a company in Australia, not Australia, but Jewish, Israel. Have you done any research on that? They are building a facility over there that will blow your minds. Look it up, folks. It's there because we're not doing all the research. They don't allow us to do the research in this country because of what it's scheduled. So they're offshoring all this. So if it ever does open up in the United States, our problem isn't going to be homegrown. It's what's going to come into this country.
Exactly, which is why we would be concerned about the DEA rescheduling this as Schedule 2. because that would just spawn a whole new era of enforcement for the protection of those interests. I mean, we still make illegal your Xanax, and if you were to be distributing Xanax, you'd be in even more trouble than cannabis. So I don't know how much time I have left. So okay, yeah, sure.
I just wanted to support what you're saying because I'm from Colorado, and the wholesale price for pounds right now is right about $9.50 or $1,000.
Right, and it's going to get even less. I mean, what's going on? I think California is probably the center of our universe. Los Angeles has been working on this from a city perspective for years. They are more developed than anything I've seen around the United States, but that's just my opinion. I think Colorado was early politically because of the efforts of individuals there, but really the center and heart of our industry has been in California for a long time. Okay, I think I'm just going to wrap it up. I'll be here the rest of the day. See Camorn at 4 o'clock if you're still here. He is the hardest working defense attorney in Michigan. He doesn't sell you down a river. He's fantastic. Stay for him.